welcome to Virtual Concert Hall's live music channel. My name is Chris Au, and I have with me the amazing co-founder of Virtual Concert Halls, Dr. Anna Ouspenskaya.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining. What a pleasure to be back again.
Absolutely.
And co-hosting these wonderful programs. I'm enjoying them immensely. I hope you all do too.
Yeah, and this is part 3 of the documentary of Beethoven's First Symphony, written and narrated by Lawrence Rapchak, created by New Media Productions Worldwide and Virtual Concert Halls, as well as produced by the Architects of Music.
And I'm very grateful for this incredible collaboration with these wonderful organizations and especially the people who are taking part in creating those films. And this collaboration definitely has been made possible by our shared passion to bring musicians, music events, and programs in real time to our audiences from around the globe.
It was standard practice to repeat the entire exposition so that the audience could hear all of the main materials again before plunging into the central development section, where Beethoven uses a device that's very common with composers, many of whom struggled with the process of true symphonic writing. It's taking a theme from the exposition, say, take our main theme. And many composers in the coming years would fall back on this device because it's all they knew how to do. Simply repeat the theme in different keys and with different accompaniments. So this might become this. Or maybe this. Etc. And you just kind of go around the block several times in different keys. Now, Beethoven will do more than this in his development section, but still, he's basically relied on this device, as you will hear. By comparison, the first movement development of Haydn's Symphony 102 that we examined was much more inventive than this. But Beethoven was just starting out here, still finding himself at age 29. So never fear, things would begin to change in his next symphony. So here is Beethoven's central development section as it occurs, and I'll call out the events as they happen. Here's the main theme. It's repeated now in sequences. Here it's in D major, now in G major, and leading to a shadowy C minor. And there's the ascending triads. The triads continue through various harmonic regions. And here's that connecting theme, now in E flat major, with its downward scale. Now the main theme is passed around in the woodwinds and the low strings. It's a sequence now in F minor. Now we're in G minor. And now the main theme in a new version. In this woodwind phrase, it's taken from the slow introduction. We're in the key of A minor, and we cadence now in a big unison E. And now the outline of the dominant chord. And our recapitulation in the full orchestra. And there's our recapitulation. And Beethoven sticks to the classical playbook, essentially repeats everything in order from the exposition. But now we stay in the home key of C major, etc., instead of, and not in G major as it was in the exposition, etc. And just as in Mozart and Haydn, the symphonies that we've examined. The structure, the architecture of this movement is flawlessly shaped and balanced, and it's also clear. We recognize the themes from the exposition as they occur in the development section, then in the recap. But now there's a brief coda, which starts with a simple sequential treatment of the main theme, like so, leading to F major, and then leading to D major, and now finally to C major. Aha! And those dynamic chords that we heard early in the exposition to get things really going, they now return in the coda, but now they have a new harmonic progression and a sort of dislocated rhythm between treble and bass, like so. Which adds that extra burst of energy as the main theme now will propel us through to the end. And you'll hear the grand, sustained expanse of C major hovering throughout the entire orchestra with the main theme chugging away underneath. And the rising triad everywhere. And this is so similar to the end of the Mozart Symphony 34 first movement that we've explored. And I didn't plan it this way, but the carry-through of the Mozartean model in its design, its spirit, and its sound is remarkable. Here's the coda now to the first movement.
I think that's a masterclass in first movement writing.
That's right.
Yeah, of a symphony. Yeah, there's nothing you can. There's no flaw. It's perfect. It's so perfect.
Absolutely perfectly proportionate, and Beethoven was a very good mathematician, so he counted the measures
Yes.
to keep the proportions where they should be, and he was a child of enlightenment, as Larry mentioned in the previous program.
Yeah.
We saw, and the enlightenment was fascination with the Greek concepts of proportion and harmonious relations between parts within the whole, and of course one of the forefront ideas in there was of the golden cut, the proportion, the arch development, and the musicians spent quite a bit of approaching music scientifically. The development of the music through the time scientifically. The tempos and the metronomes were a big part and always are. So the number of measures and the developing towards the climax, the length of the climax proportionate to the climb up to the climax, then decline that proportion to the previous two, and so forth, and it all expressed itself in measures, vice versa, tempo of the movement, number of the beats, and all that. So there's a lot of that background, and Beethoven definitely was aware of that. Like sometimes it feels like, well, why did he add all those additional, seemingly unnecessary chords at the end? Well. Yeah. Don't we all feel like, if you take them out, it feels incomplete? Part of the reason of that, he arrived at the tonic, and there's still a couple of measures left to complete the proportion, so he just adds the chords.
Yeah, it's really quite fascinating to see him approach music like this, because this sort of approach to music it's done often with Bach's music, this idea of proportion. And I think Bach, also a fantastic mathematician and a genius of proportion, understood a lot of these, how important it is. And I'm really glad you bring it up, because I think as much as music is in the space of time, but it also exists in this, in the dimension of space. It takes up sort of room in our mind, in the way we envision it, and it's really quite an intangible, invisible thing when you play music, because you're not really doing anything physically in terms of creating something physically. But you have something on paper, or you play something and it exists in time and then it disappears. And so to have proportion within that is very likened to this sort of architects of music idea, the architecture that is built. And of course, you don't really see it. If only we could see music in terms of architectural buildings, it would be very fascinating to see how Symphony No. 1 looks compared to Symphony No. 5 looks, what kind of towers.
What
or
a brilliant,
cathedrals.
interesting idea, Chris. Let's put it out to our viewers. All right, if there are aspiring architects in our audience, and if you get inspired by this idea to transpose the Beethoven Symphony into a building, you can use AI nowadays. You don't even have to
I
use
wonder
the,
if
the
that would
drawing
be.
board.
Yeah, I wonder if that
A
would
prompt
be a
for
really
the
cool
AI.
Yeah, exactly. Because then that sort of, that would be really, really creative to see what they would come up with. And what would the pastoral symphony look like? Is it actually an actual building, or is it a
Landscape,
forest?
maybe, yeah, forest,
Yeah,
landscape, yeah.
absolutely. So that's
Interesting.
very interesting for us to think about. But that's really what we're talking about here. What is really applicable here is to see this sort of proportion take the space within our minds, I guess, is what it comes down to. The space within our minds, the space within our listening, and there's a sort of what people call the sound world, or an oral dimension. But these are all just words to describe something that absolutely has very little to do with the emotions that you can feel coming up from hearing this kind of music with the rhythm and the harmonies. And what I love is I love two things. First of all, how he finds his way to C major towards the end. You're like, oh, is he going to get there? Is he going to get there? And he gets there. That's very cool. And the other thing I love is also how he ends the development. And he's like, you end up with a E natural, or and you're different keys for a while, and then you're like, oh, what's he gonna do with that? And then he does this descending sort of descending notes within the dominant seventh, I guess, of C major, and then he gets back into it, and you're like, oh, of course, there we go. And I think that's really quite a wonderful invention, like wonderful way to do it. And so I
Yeah, it
love those two
definitely is
things.
a sort of a peak preview at Beethoven as an innovator of the form and the use of the orchestra and use of the symphony form later. Just like Lawrence Rapchak pointed out, the first symphony was very much confined to the rules of the time of creating the symphony. However, there are some elements within that very prescribed structure, which Beethoven basically laid down the grid and filled it with his own thematic material. There's still a lot of sort of peak previews at his innovativeness, which is going to show much later down the road. And I wanted also to bring back the thought of music and mathematics and music and architecture and engineering. A lot of bias, and I believe that's a misconception, is that music lives in a different part of the brain, and musicians are poor mathematicians, and they're not so impractical, and they don't know how to count money and that kind of stuff. History proves that being just a misconception over and again. And with those lectures of Lawrence Rapchak unveiling the inner workings of Beethoven, how he prepares the grid, how he structures it, how he deals with a balance of different proportions, lengths, and ranges, and all of that. It's not intuitive. I mean, it's intuitive too, but there's a lot of abstract thinking involved. Let's say mathematics in its purest form is abstract. So is music, in a way. But that's where the two definitely converge in our creative process, and it's very interesting. And I think it's in addition to that being just interesting as a information, I think it's a good life lesson to people who trying to be practical with what they encounter, not just being consumers, but learn lessons from everything they encounter, including Beethoven's music. Something which can help them realize themselves in the spheres. Because, you know, if you think, okay, I'm very mathematical, therefore I'm never going to play violin. Maybe you're going to play violin very well if you try it, if you didn't have that bias. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's that's a very interesting idea. Well, I want to, before I forget, I want to also talk about how Larry Rapchak also gives a head nod in a way to Mozart. It reminds me that, you know, a lot of the time our musical world is very interwoven with other people, and our influences are really great. And what you mentioned before makes me think of, yeah, like how our world of music is so broad, and to be able to for Beethoven to either acknowledge willingly or unwillingly Mozart is also a really brilliant thing that Larry captures that sort of idea very well.
Yeah, that's that little, not so little, but a nod to Mozart's influence, and how at the beginning, Beethoven is looking for his own voice, and he basically steps on the shoulders of the best predecessors. He takes the best from everything that was available, and mind you, there was no internet in there. He couldn't look on IMSLP for the score of any Mozart symphony or anything. That required active search and active being on the lookout, and active research, and being really proactively looking for those influences. And then also like for everything and everyone ever living, it's sorting out the weeds, because Mozart and Haydn were not the only composers who were around that time living. And if we say today's creative world is chaotic and very hard to discern what's good, what's not so good, and what to take in and what to set aside, and maybe not let that influence you. That's not new. That's been always out there. There's scores and scores of names of composers who were as big a name, or maybe even bigger names than Mozart's and Haydn's name. It wasn't like okay, go to, if you want a good influence, that's the people for you to be influenced by. So even the very young Beethoven, he was just 29 when he composed that symphony. Even a very young Beethoven already had put a lot of effort into deciding and choosing which influences to let take a hold, and let be part of his creative process.
Yeah, because I think ultimately, as you see later on in his life, Beethoven becomes more and more fascinated with Handel, and then Handel's music. He's also very much influenced by the historical and political times that are facing, you know, him and Vienna and the people around him. You see that this is a really integral part of being an artist, and it all interweaves. I remember reading in a biography of Beethoven that obviously Mozart's sort of presence was very much in his mind, as was Haydn's when he was composing symphonies in general and just pieces of music, because it's so any great artist acknowledges the genius of other great artists, and to create in a similar field.
Yeah, and being able to recognize who those geniuses are. For us, it's kind of obvious. Of course, Mozart is a genius.
Yeah.
But that's
at that time,
that's a 2020 vision in the rare mere view.
Yeah, exactly.
So back then, you know, we also talk about some geniuses not being recognized during their time by other geniuses around them. Look at the story between Chopin and Liszt. Chopin did not recognize Franz Liszt as a genius, not at all. And, you know, this is, we just need to remember the world was, in that sense, no different from today. So curation of the art, and, you know, self-curation or public curation of the art is never an easy thing. And for a very young Beethoven, I mean, he was still just learning. Basically, that symphony is a study score, preparing for the next. For him to be so keenly aware of what's the best around him, that's part of how he became who he became.
Yeah. Do certain in our modern world of composers and do any sort of maybe not in the living composers, but maybe the composers of the 20th century. Are there any composers you think would, in your opinion, would start to stand the test of time? You feel like, oh, these are composers we're going to hear for the next 30 to 50 years and onwards because of not only their influence, but also their work and the playability of their music. For example, someone like Leonard Bernstein obviously stands to mind. Do you have any other musician? I mean, Ligeti, I think, also is starting to get this traction. I know he passed away only quite recently. Perhaps Lutoslavsky. Do any other musicians come to mind for you? That's
Chris, this is a huge question. Let's maybe come back to that in a separate program within our Music and Musicians from around the globe series, because this is a very important question. And it provokes a lot of thought, especially, once you ask who, then the next question comes, why? Right? And I feel like it's the who cannot be quite given due diligence without at least touching on the whys.
Yeah, and I think of course it's a bigger topic. I think it's just related to how we discuss Beethoven as this monumental character. I think it's also important for our audience or for us to discuss. Hey, what are we looking forward to in our world today? What is applicable now, so that we don't just I guess idolize these composers of the past, but also continue to look forward with optimism, just as Beethoven does in terms of what we have available in our and it's very interesting in our way in our daily work. It's like maybe one day in the future we'll look back and it's the composers for games or for music for movies. That's just this is the music that will stand the test of time, and we're not even expected. I don't think perhaps people back in the day would expect the music of J.S. Bach to stand the test of time for such a long time. And it was, if not for the work of Mendelssohn, perhaps. I think it's just fascinating how history continues to go, and we have very little control over who gets to last forever.
That's a very, very good topic and very interesting. I really would love to explore it, because especially where this question comes from, because all of us, we do and we should value our time very much and value our output very much. So clearly we want to join the rank of those who are going to last.
Yeah.
And how do we do that? So we need to, like Beethoven, how did he know that for him it was a good idea to learn from Mozart and Haydn and maybe not from Clementi?
Yeah.
How do we do it in today's world? By how do we join the stream of creating music or performance, whatever that is, or painting, which is going to build the legacy as opposed to lead us to the dead end of being forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's very important. And, sometimes people just dismiss it. Okay, well, I'm not genius enough to even tackle that. Not true. That's how you discover your genius, by actually tackling those questions. Because
I think so.
Beethoven did.
Yeah, and I think we'll discuss this more in our next part, of course, and I want to make sure we do that, because I think music is something that's very fluid within the history of our existence, and obviously there's so many different factors that influence it. But for now, I want to thank our team and our collaborators, particularly New Media Productions, Virtual Concert Halls, Architects of Music, and Larry Rapchak. If you enjoyed this show, please consider subscribing and following us and sending us some comments or feedback as well.
Yes, visit our channels. Virtual Concert Halls is now broadcasting on over 50 channels and platforms all over the world, which are dedicated to providing great content of music and musicians and various programs. And of course, please visit our websites. You see on the screen those websites, and check out other events and other possibilities, both for audience members and for actual creators, musicians, composers, performers, music organizations, and so forth. We are expanding our reach, and we always look for new collaborations.
Absolutely. And so this has been part 3. It's been such a pleasure to have you today. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time for part 4 of our Beethoven 1 documentary series.
Yes. Bye now.
No matter where you are or who you are, music connects us all. We started with a dream, but now we are paving the future. Welcome to the Sound Expressiva Global Competition. Fully virtual, yet bringing musicians closer together than ever before, now on a global scale. True live, inclusivity, diversity, connection, community, an extraordinary array of judges. Get noticed by companies all over the world. Prizes, scholarships, performance opportunities. Apply to be a part of the most exciting congregation of artists like nothing you've ever seen before. We guarantee quality and leave no musician behind. We can't wait to hear you on the virtual stage.